Hello YouTube, I'm Toby. Today's project is turning this Lenovo M90p Thinkcentre into a capable gaming machine. First things first, let's take a look at this beautiful machine. On the front of this machine we see the Thinkcentre logo as well as the power button and the indication LED for showing hard disk activity. A little further down we find a DVD drive, 2 USB ports, 1 headphone jack and one microphone jack. We also see some wonderful stickers on the bottom. On the back of the system we have our power connector as well as a range of different ports. Unfortunately this machine is a little too old to have any fast USB ports, but what we have will work fine for now. Opening the side panel we get a first look at the system. My first impression is that this looks very clean. The previous owner obviously took time to make sure it was ready for a new one. This motherboard is a Lenovo OEM. I have not yet found the exact model number for this board. The socket is LGA 1156 and we'll get to the CPU in a minute. There's one PCIe X16 slot, one PCIe X4 slot and 2 PCI slots. We have room for 4 sticks of RAM. Currently this system already has 2 sticks of 2GB DDR3 at 1333 MHz. The bad news is that this board only supports up to 8GB of RAM at 1333 MHz, which sort of limits our expansion capabilities. Still, 8GB is okay for gaming. Next, let's talk a little about this CPU. It's an Intel Core i5-650. It's clocked at 3.2 GHz. This processor is only a dual core, but it does have 4 threads, so hopefully it'll be good enough. Honestly, I thought this was a quad core when I bought the system. This CPU also contains the graphics chip for this system. Moving on to the hard drive, we have a 500GB storage at 7200 RPM. I have no idea how old this hard drive is, but it doesn't look too old to be reliable. The power supply is only 280 watt module. This will obviously have to be replaced if we want to get any use out of this machine. Other things that are worth mentioning about this computer is that there's a small speaker at the front of the case. It's not the greatest in the world, but it works okay. Turning on the computer, it boots straight into Windows 10. I immediately went ahead and downloaded both Cinebench and Steam. Taking a look at the Cinebench run, it does look like 4 cores, and if this was an AMD FX chip, they probably would have sold it as a quad core. Cough cough. Finally the run ended and we saw a score of 242 points. I was hoping for more, but this is an okay score. Moving on to the OpenGL test, we got what can best be described as a PowerPoint show. I have to admit I was a little disappointed at this performance, but we'll still be installing a dedicated GPU later, so this is not a problem. We ended with a score of 2.66 frames per second. Next up is the Resident Evil 6 benchmarking tool. The test ran at low settings and 760p. This also turned out to be quite the PowerPoint show, and we ended with a score of 671 points. And it was at this point I realized that I was not going to try CSGO on this system. I really don't see a point in trying that. Finally I ran the user benchmark. We got a gaming score of 12%, a desktop score of 33% and a workstation score of 16%. The low workstation score seems surprising since this computer is designed to be just that. Alright, enough playing around, it's time to upgrade this thing. First off, I wanted a faster boot drive, so I went out and bought a PNY 120GB SSD. One thing to know about this upgrade is that the SATA connector on the SSD is much faster than the connector on the motherboard, but still it's better than a hard drive. Next up, let's do something about this power supply. Instead of the old 280 watt unit, I went out and bought a 550 watt unit with a cool orange fan, and you know that makes everything better. Or at least that's what I think the manufacturer thought. For RAM, I have 8GB of 1333 MHz DDR3. I did have to put some of the old RAM back in with one of the new sticks since I was having issues with one of the sticks. Still, we're at 8GB. The GPU we'll be installing is the NVIDIA GTX 760. It's an old card, but the 700 series still seems to be a viable option, and the dual-core processor may not be able to handle anything much faster than this. Finally, we need some lights. I bought 2 blue cold cathodes that came with a handy on-off switch. Now the system is finally complete, and I hope you're as excited as I am to test the system. The total amount I spent on this system was 2,050 crowns, which is somewhere between 350 and 400 US dollars. Not as cheap as I'd hoped, but not too bad. I installed Windows 10 and downloaded the drivers in Steam, and the test we'll be running are the Resident Evil 6 benchmarking tool, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, Arma 3 and the user benchmarking tool. Resident Evil 6 ran very well. The settings were set to high at 1080p and we ended with a score of 7,752. This is a major improvement and a very good sign for the system. Next up is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. The settings were mixed a bit between low, medium and high. We are of course running at 1080p still. The general experience was very smooth. FPS wise we seem to be running between 50 and 120 frames per second, but mostly stable around the 60 FPS mark. CPU and GPU usage seem to be very well matched here. Neither hit 100% usage, but they were close. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds was set to a mixture of low and medium settings, once again at 1080p. At first the gameplay was stuttering and I started to fear that PUBG was too much for the system. Luckily though, after a minute the FPS shot up to around 50 frames per second and seems to be stable there. I'm not sure why PUBG does this, but it seems that in the first minute in any match is the most stressing on some of the systems I've worked on. Once again, CPU and GPU usage seem to be matched. Both hit 100%, but neither seem to bottleneck the other. I was very unsure whether Arma 3 would be too much of a challenge, but I fired it up anyways. Settings were set to low 1080p. The first match went surprisingly well. We were running at 60 FPS with a few dips now and then. Now this is a small CQB match though, and we need to see how it handles larger maps. As you may have guessed, larger maps was a bit of a challenge. The FPS was jumping around between 20 and 35 frames per second. This will most likely get a bit better if one was to turn the resolution down a bit. MSI Afterburner showed some funky numbers though. It seems that although both the CPU and GPU had hit at 100%, neither was running above 50% at the very last few minutes of the gameplay. We may have another bottleneck somewhere in the system, and my guess is maybe the RAM, but I just can't be sure. Last benchmark is the user benchmark. Our gaming score had climbed to 31%, desktop had climbed to 46% and workstation was up to 26%. This is quite an improvement, but is it worth it for the money? I think it is, but what's your opinion? Please let me know. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching.